Hi there everybody, Dr. Keesha here. I'm doing this video about natural interventions for breast cancer as well as natural preventions, which of course prevention is the very best way to go, interventions being after you've already arrived at that diagnosis. But please note that breast cancer in today's day and age doesn't need to be the terminal illness that it has been in decades past, because we know so much more now about the human body and the toxins we're exposed to, our genetics, and how to utilize all of that and harness it to have optimal health. And that being said, sometimes, I might alienate a lot of people with this comment, but sometimes you might have decided it's just time to go and your body is agreeing with you. I know that's happened to me. I've had breast cancer already, and I know that when I was diagnosed, I was in such a state of distress and upset in my life over actually something I talked about in a video this morning that I did on Facebook Live, and I'll touch on it again. But I was in such a state of upset in my life that I believe that my cells just kind of agreed and got very toxic to help me with what my subconscious mind wanted to actually get done, which was to leave the planet. So there are several different reasons why we get cancer, and I'm talking about breast cancer just because our incidence of breast cancer has not really gone down to at a substantial rate for the amount of study that we put into it. And October is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, so it's a great time to be talking about some of the things that you can do to prevent and intervene with breast cancer naturally. Now, I get a lot of email every week about breast cancer, which is another reason I'm doing this. It's basically answering some questions that I've had in the last little while via Facebook and on email. So always remember, you guys can do that, and I'll make a video about it or I'll write a blog about it. I'm always happy to provide information about anything that you want to learn about. So with breast cancer, in my book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, I talked about 4 corners of chronic disease, and cancer is indeed one of those kinds of diseases. Hi, Elizabeth. And when we're talking about a puzzle, we're talking about something where there are pieces, multiple pieces that have to be put together to form a picture, and everybody's puzzle is a little bit different. And so in Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, I talk about these 4 corners that you start with. You know how you're solving a puzzle, you always start with the corner pieces, you turn over the edge pieces, and then you fill in the middle based on color patterns. So with those 4 corners, they're going to be your exposure to toxicity in your lifetime, your body's ability to get rid of said toxins, your genetics, your past childhood experiences. These are called your ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and leaky gut, also called intestinal permeability syndrome. Those 4 reasons are the reasons that we get ill. And you'll notice that if you think about those 4 pieces, they interrelate with one another. In other words, adverse childhood experiences can upregulate, or you could say turn on, which actually isn't totally accurate, flip on a gene that you might have that predisposes you to a genetic marker for breast cancer. So you hear a lot about, or read a lot about, celebrities having prophylactic or preventative mastectomies because they have genetics in place. I'm not going to say a ton about that, except that your genetics are not set in stone. Just because you have a gene there doesn't mean that you have absolute certainty that you're going to get breast cancer. Now, that being said, I am very wired for breast cancer in my own genetics. In my family line, everybody's had breast cancer that's female, and I indeed got it also. And my genetics definitely, since they predisposed me and were there, I had some toxic things that switched that on, and so I'm one of those people. But I also reversed it naturally. I didn't do chemo, I didn't do radiation, I didn't do any chemicals, and I didn't do surgery. Now, does that mean that every single person across the board can do it that way? No, I'm absolutely not saying that. What I am saying is, I began studying my own puzzle. So that's the thing that I'm trying to actually stress right now, is that you each have your own individual milieu of genes, past childhood experiences, toxic exposure, and your ability to get rid of it, and leaky gut. So when we talk about preventing breast cancer or any other cancer or autoimmune disease, remember these all are in the same subject. It's chronic illness that your body's gotten to a state that finally cannot maintain balance anymore. So we're looking at all four of those, okay? All right, so I'm looking, there's somebody asking a question here. A missing link, the therapeutic dose of calcium D-glucarate, along with other supplements, has been a missing link in my estrogen dominant issues. Huge difference in my thermography in the last 5 months. Thanks, Michelle. That's actually one of the things we're going to talk about, so I'm glad that you said that. I'm doing this off my telephone, and I'm noticing that I'm 52 years old and can't read the font very well. It's coming across, so pardon me while I squint and try and read what you're saying. So yes, we're going to talk about those supplements, because if you do have genetic markers for estrogen metabolism that's not very efficient, for example, a cytochrome 1B1 SNP in your genetics, which anyone that reads genetics can actually tell you if you have that or not. And there are a lot of other genes in there that we can look at, but if you have a problem metabolizing out the carcinogenic metabolites of estrogen, then they'll build up in your body and they can cause cancer. And if it's an estrogen issue you're having, then it'll be an estrogen related cancer, such as uterine, ovarian, or breast. So this is so important, and what Michelle's saying is that calcium D-glucarate really made a huge difference for her in terms of before and after her thermograms. So much in that statement right there that we need to unpack. For example, mammogram versus thermogram. I get that question all the time too. So the therapeutic dosage that I talk about, and if you have a SNP with your estrogen markers in your genetics, Michelle, you actually should be taking anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of calcium D-glucarate. I tell people to take it at bedtime, because that's when your liver dumps, it gets rid of things, and that's when we're trying to move those nasty little estrogen metabolites out of your body. So you want to really aid your liver at that time. That's a fantastic one. DIM is another one. They do two different things, and so I will usually recommend DIM and calcium D-glucarate. You'll notice on my website on DrKeesha.com in the store, I have a breast cancer prevention kit, and that is, let's see, I've built up to 3,000. Perfect. That's probably just right. And in fact, you're already benchmarking, Michelle, your thermogram, and that's how to do it. There's actually, I always will say this, there's no one size fits all in your diet and your supplement regimen and your exercise routine and your sleep pattern. There's just no one size fits all of anything, and also no one size fits all for your entire lifetime. So what works for you today may need to shift in a year or so, which is why I always say test, don't guess. And I like to have people do testing every single year. So the test that I use if I'm really looking at breast cancer risk is I do genetic testing on my patients, and then I also do a test if it shows that they have a large amount of risk. It's an estrogen metabolites test that can be done via the urine, and that will say if the gene that you have that's predisposing you to cancer because of your poor estrogen metabolism is actually struggling, if you're really having trouble with it, if you are keeping those metabolites inside. So what we want to know is if that's true or not just what you're wired for. So that's a really important distinction. We never treat the gene. We always look at what's accurate and what's real in you. And I don't like to have fear mongering around this. I like to really use data and be totally accurate and precise about it. I don't want everybody taking 3,000 milligrams of calcium D-glucarate every night. You might not need it. And you want to make sure that you're just giving your body what it needs, a little assistance. and not pounding it over the head with a sledgehammer. So those are 2 supplements. Another one that you want to really look at is a function called methylation. And methylation is something that happens in the 2nd phase of your liver detoxification. It's necessary for good brain function, every single organ in your body, and for you to get rid of those harmful estrogen metabolites. And again, in your genetic testing, I can tell if you're methylating well or not. Now, the methylation or MTHFR genes that have gotten the most press are MTHFR 677 and MTHFR 1298. Those are not the only methylation genes in your body, they're just the most famous ones. And so what we want to know is your whole context. We don't ever just treat the gene. This is so important, and I keep saying it because it is really important. We want to know if you're methylating well, if you're getting rid of if your other conjugation pathways are working in that 2nd phase of liver detoxification, and if your phase 1 liver detoxification is going well. Now, I've done another video about this already. I've talked about this in blogs, so I'm not going to go into a deep detail about this, but it is really important when you're trying to individualize your own prevention or treatment. All right, so coming back now, I want to go through those 4 corners very strategically. So let's talk about toxins, since I'm on the subject of the liver. If you have been, this is really interesting, if you've, there have been movies, Julia Roberts was in one, and I don't remember, it was a long time ago, movies or magazine articles or online, you'll read stories about whole neighborhoods or schools becoming contaminated because there's an environmental toxin that everyone's being exposed to. But not everybody gets sick from it, and that's the interesting thing. So there are higher incidences of breast cancer in certain areas in the United States. One is on the East Coast in Long Island, and one is on the West Coast. And both of them, in Marin County, California, both of them are upper socioeconomic class kind of demographics, okay, neighborhoods, you could say. And so when studies came out about that, scientists started scratching their heads and saying, okay, so these people are eating really well, a lot of them are eating organic, and yet they have this higher incidence of breast cancer. And what they started looking at is the fact that these people were actually drinking a lot of their water from plastic water bottles, bottled water. They were getting their nails painted a lot, they were getting their hair colored, they were doing a lot of chemical things to their bodies, spray tans and teeth whitening, and all of these toxins that they were being exposed to. Now that's really interesting. When you get into your car and you have leather seats that have been treated for stain resistance with a chemical and you're breathing it in all the time, or you have the latest electronic gadget that you're wearing on your wrist to go to bed. I'm always telling people, please don't wear those. You do not need to have your sleep monitored and be exposed to EMFs. So, or Bluetooths around your neck constantly, jawbones, all of these things are this constant invasion of your energetic field. And we're finding through scientific study that the people that are exposed to more of these high-end kind of lifestyle choices are actually getting sicker, in spite of the fact that they're eating organic. So I want to really stress that this is a really important fact. As much as you can, you need to be putting things in and on your body that are natural. If you read a label and you can't pronounce the word, please don't put it on your body and don't eat it. And when I say body, I am including your toenails and your fingernails and your hair and your teeth and your skin, all of it. So you're eating it. So that's really important. And nowadays it's super easy. You can go onto Google and you can find a recipe to make your own deodorant if you want to, or you can go to your local health food store and you can find one that someone else has made that doesn't have all the harmful chemicals in there that also not just affect your estrogen, but some of the other things that we're seeing, like with Alzheimer's and other autoimmune diseases. So toxic exposure is a big thing, and I want you to control what you can control for, because you might not be able to control the air you breathe. You might not be able to control beyond organic, what's being put on your vegetables and your fruits if you're not growing them in your own garden. So please really watch for the things you can control. So the other piece is the liver detoxification piece I was talking about, and that's your body's ability to get rid of those toxins. This is why some people get sick in these areas and then others don't. I always use George Burns as an example of this, who, you know, is famous for smoking cigars and drinking scotch every single day, and yet lived to be a ripe old age with all his brain function intact. And yet, I'm probably going to get a letter from him someday, from Woody Allen. I use Woody Allen as the opposite end of that spectrum, who seems to be fairly sickly and neurotic, self-described neuroses, in spite of perhaps maybe being healthier than George Burns would have been. So that's the difference between our genetic types. I'm using them as sort of archetypical examples. So that's one thing. Now the other piece around toxins is not just those names you can't pronounce, and the ingredients that are on labels in your food that you have no idea what they are, but also your thoughts and your experiences. Those can also be very toxic. And this is when I got breast cancer, actually. So I'd already had autoimmune disease. I'd already been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I'd already reversed it. I'd already discovered Ayurvedic medicine, integrative medicine. I was already practicing what I preach, with detoxing 4 times a year at the season change. I was taking good supplements, and I got breast cancer. And the reason is because food is not enough. It's only 50% of the equation. The other part is everything going on up here. And I've told this story before, so I won't belabor it, but one day my son told me that he had been sexually molested, and probably my oldest daughter and my other son too. He wasn't sure, but for sure he had. And that just, because I had been sexually molested when I found out that a babysitter that I left my kids with to go grocery shopping had hurt my kids. I was so upset, and obviously just shame and guilt and distress that was off the charts, just unmeasurable, how I didn't even want to live. And in fact, I felt quite suicidal. Like if I could just wake up the next day and not be alive, I would be completely content and happy. So my body agreed with that. Now this is part of the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that I write about in Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle. This is your body agreeing with you, your cortisol going into your system as a fight or flight mechanism. And over time, you're not meant to have that happening in a prolonged rate for prolonged periods of time. And so it starts to break down your cells, break down your tissues. And of course, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I was so upset. So I did some pretty heavy therapy to come to grips with my own shame and guilt in this. I had my kids get right into therapy, and we all were working quite hard at this. And I was actually focusing more on them. And I found the babysitter who had grown up now. I tracked him down and called him and asked him, you know, the first question. He actually said, I've been expecting this call for many years. And I asked him, you know, the first thing I need to know is why? Like, how could you do this to children that were entrusted into your care? And his response to me was, I was just curious. He was a young, 12-year-old boy at the time. And so, that was a really interesting and somehow liberating response for me. And I thought, okay, because in my own case, I'd been an adult man who it was a power thing. And I thought, okay, so that's the motive. So let's get underneath how to solve this now. So I got them all together talking, and we did a forgiveness practice that was really, really amazing. And my kids responded really great to therapy. And I think probably the babysitter, the young man who I was talking to on the telephone and went through this process with us, probably it helped him too, because he had to have felt a lot of guilt and shame over his actions. So it wound up being this really quite amazing experience for all of us as a family. But I found myself getting very angry later, and this was interesting. And I was getting more and more resentful that no one had done this for me when I was a child, that no one had asked me if I'd been abused. It hadn't thought about those symptoms that they saw, because I'd asked my son when he told me that yes. And so I thought, oh, why wasn't there anyone there for me? And I started feeling just really resentful and bitter. And it's bitterness that can cause cancer. And science actually has said this many, many ways. So I started feeling all of this, and then lo and behold, I found a lump. And I went in and I had myself checked, and sure enough, there was this big tumor in my left breast right over my heart. And I had this wonderful blood supply pulsating and feeding it. And I thought, oh, when I saw that mass, I know where you came from and I know why you're there. There was just no doubt in my mind. It had been 4 months since all this other stuff had kind of closed out. So then I went and did my own therapy, and I told my radiologist, all right, I know why this is there. Give me a month and I will look up an oncologist, but I need to try something first. So I gave myself 30 days. And in that time, I did this really intense therapy, which is now part of the You Unbroken program that I've written that's on my website on DrKeesha.com under programs. It's that's what I did. And I also did energy work. I'm a Reiki master, and so is my husband, and so we would do energy work every morning on it. And you know, in 30 days, when I went back to get my ultrasound, it was gone. And that area where it had been, the blood supply was just sort of hanging there with nothing to feed. And the radiologist said, well, whatever you did, keep it up. And so one of the things I did to follow this up, so since I knew I had clicked on those genes, I went ahead and I did my genetics, and I did an estrogen metabolism test, which is what I was talking about earlier. And I had the very worst results I have ever seen in any of my patients over all the years I've been practicing. And so I called the lab and I talked to the medical director and I said, I've never seen results worse than this. And she said, you know, Dr. Ewers, neither have I. And so we put our heads together and we looked at some things and at what could be missing in my program, because like I said, I thought I was doing everything I possibly could. And I was still collecting metabolites and like I was Velcro. And that's the way a lot of women are if you have those genes. Our fat tissue in our bodies is actually a magnet for what we call xenoestrogens. These are toxins in the environment that mimic estrogen. So even if you're not taking hormone replacement therapy or bioidentical hormones, it's the stuff in the environment that can actually translate as estrogen in your body. So I increased my methylation, which I was already doing anyway, and I started taking calcium D-glucarate, much like what Michelle said. And I used thermography instead of mammography, because when you have a mammogram, first of all, there are a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives with mammography, and you're exposed to radiation. So I'm not going to say mammograms are bad, and I'm not going to say they're good, but thermography doesn't give you the risk with radiation. It actually is looking at heat. It's looking at places where your body's inflamed. And so I recommend people use thermograms every year, and you have to do one as a baseline and then another one in a few months. And then if you have a place that lights up like a Christmas tree, then you go get a mammogram or an ultrasound, even better yet, or an MRI. So that's now what I do. And just like Michelle, after I started taking the calcium D-glucarate, now remember, this was after I also detoxed my emotions that were killing me, okay? I detoxed on all levels. Ayurvedic medicine calls this your panchakoshas. I talk about these in the Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle book. You have your physical, you have your energetic body, you have your emotional, your mental, and then your bliss body. And we don't reach bliss either physically, emotionally, or mentally if we're toxic in any of those layers. So a detox must include all of them, which is what my whole individualized life detox program is all about. The WILD program it's looking at all 5 of those layers and helping you detox them, giving you a structure for that. So that's the story behind the toxic corner piece of your puzzle. And then leaky gut, intestinal permeability, is when the little cells on the inside of your gut wall start to pull apart, and they're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to have tight junctions between them. And one of the biggest things that will break those little cells apart is cortisol, which is the stress hormone that's released when you have a lot of fight or flight reactivity. And if you have trauma in your early childhood, then anytime in your life, but if you start early, then that means you've had years of cortisol buildup in there, and that will start to split apart those cells. Now, the other thing that will break them apart is heavy-duty antibiotic use, steroid use, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So I split my my cells apart like crazy because I took so much ibuprofen as a marathon runner, I didn't even know that any of this stuff was harmful. So I really did a number on myself. I also used to have a lot of strep throat when I was growing up and took a lot of antibiotics. And then I also had this little sexual abuse thing going on. And so a lot of cortisol, a lot of things to damage my gut wall. So what happens is your food that you eat can escape through the little cell walls that have come apart. And when that happens, your immune system, which is supposed to do this, it's supposed to attack any alien invader. But usually we think of that as a virus or a bacteria or something that's not supposed to be there, instead of broccoli, right? Or salmon or coconut oil or blueberries, or things that we traditionally think of as healthy foods. You can become resistant to those things, intolerant or sensitive, if you have leaky gut. And so I like to do food sensitivity testing in my practice to look and see how reactive your immune system is. You don't want an immune system that's like the bar bully that pulls a gun and shoots everybody before thinking, before asking questions, right? It's probably not a good metaphor in this day and age. I'm thinking of the cartoon Western. So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, nice, right? It's okay, immune system. This is a nice little part of the body. You don't want to attack it. So we want to heal that leaky gut, and we want to heal past trauma, and then we want to look at genetics. So that's the skinny on breast cancer and how to really do preventative measures. So Michelle says something else. Love whole body vibration, infrared sauna, yep, and colon hydrotherapy to assist in detoxification pathways. I feel like I do 50% counseling and 50% nutritional counseling. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And that's why I'm a therapist as well as a medical provider, because of this very thing. I was in medical practice not that long before I started discovering that there was nothing in front of me in terms of symptomology that was coming from my patients that didn't have an emotional root cause. And so we really want to take a look at that. And that's exactly why I have these digital programs to help people from wherever they're at. So any more questions? Because I'm about to finish up here. The breast cancer prevention kit that's on the DrKeesha.com store is a fantastic starting place. I always say test, don't guess. Doing food sensitivity testing and urine metabolite testing and genetic testing, those three are just fantastic for really starting the process. And then we also do heavy metals and things like that, but we do it with bioenergetics in my practice now, which is just really great for saving some money for people. So we will, I'll answer questions about that on Facebook if you have them. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me. Share this and like it. If you have anybody in your life that might want to learn a little bit about how to prevent breast cancer or do some natural interventions if they are in need of it now.